Father John, thank you for following up to answer some of the questions from our chat during our talk. And we had 3 or 4 that were there that we weren't able to get to. First one has to do with OCF, and actually is a question I have as well. Oh, I'm sorry. The first one actually has to do with Orthodox and Catholics in America. It says, okay. With Orthodox friends the other night, one asked, why are there more Catholics than Orthodox in America? Do you agree? And why is it even as they shrink, we do not grow faster?
Why are there more Catholics in America than Orthodox? And if they and if they're shrinking, why do we not grow faster? Well, to begin, the basic answer just has to do, frankly, with immigration and the history of our nation, I'm sure. In the world, there are more Roman Catholics than there are Orthodox Christians, and that is certainly true in the West. And largely speaking, the immigration that we have here is more sizably Western European than Eastern European. So historically, that would be one reason, not the only reason, but one reason why there'd be more Catholics than Orthodox in our land. As to why, if the Catholic Church is shrinking, why aren't we growing faster? I'm not sure if the Catholic Church is shrinking. It may or may not be. Why are we not growing faster? I guess I could give the most basic answer is this. Narrow is the way. These are the words from the gospel, and few there are who find it. It's tragic. It's tragic, but it's somehow true. I mean, it's not somehow true. It is true. It's the gospel. I think we should start with the premise. I even made a little bumper sticker, I think, for this one time. Orthodoxy is for everyone. Everyone on the planet Earth should be an Orthodox Christian. The Orthodox Church is the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. It is the faith, the unbroken faith transmitted from our Lord to his first followers and down the ages to us. It is the Ark of Salvation. It is the capital H hospital for sinners. It is the treasure house of every blessing for every person alive. And we wish and hope and long for every person on the planet Earth to be an Orthodox Christian. Nevertheless, we live in a fallen world on the one hand, which means that each human person created in the image and likeness of God and granted freedom to choose or not to choose God, to follow him or not to follow him. And let's be honest, each of us does this to varying degrees of success in any given day. Sometimes I'm a follower, sometimes I'm a doubter, sometimes I'm a skeptic. But in the face of the commitment that is asked of an Orthodox Christian, which is deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me, in the face of what some people have called the Marine Corps of Christianity. Some people refer to the Orthodox Church as the Marine Corps of Christianity, meaning that it's the hardest, the most serious, the first to fight, the real go-getters. That's our faith. One, especially as an adult, let's put it in these terms. No adult, you probably agree, Father Joshua, no adult would become an Orthodox Christian in order to live a slack, mediocre Christian life. There are many slack, mediocre Orthodox Christians of whom I am first on many days, but what's asked of us in prayer, in fasting, in almsgiving, in reaching out, in loving our neighbor, in loving our enemy, these things are not palatable very easily, especially to the modern American mind. We are a distracted people. I speak of whom I am first. I have noticed, I'm trying to study myself in a number of different ways. And one of the things that I'm looking at in my own life is how long I can pay attention to anything. thankfully, I keep kind of a record in my mind, and though I'm distracted and I wind up doing 7 things at once, I almost always circle around and loop them all back into one thing. But that's it's distraction, not focus.
Yeah.
And our culture and our day teaches us not to focus, teaches us that instant gratification is what we're after. If we can't get it in the push of a button, we don't want it. And so it's a steep hill to become an Orthodox Christian, but the door, we hope, we'll see in some of these questions, that's not always the case. We hope that everyone knows that the door is open to every human person, and that we sincerely welcome and hope that every human being will become an Orthodox Christian and do their best, like we're doing our best, to submit ourselves to Christ. I wish just to add one little piece onto that, Father, if it's okay, and that is that beautiful passage from the end of Mark chapter 8, I think, that if anyone would follow after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me, that we read for the feasts of the cross and the middle Sunday in Great Lent, that deny oneself. This is so beautiful. I think about this often in my life, and I'm not excellent at applying it, but listen to this beautiful word. When our Lord says, if anyone will follow after me, let him deny himself. I would say, well, what does it mean to deny oneself? Does that mean, no beer in Great Lent? I mean, is that what it means, deny oneself? Actually, the verb that's used there is remarkably strong and pointed. And it's remarkably strong and pointed to the denial by Peter of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. So in the same sentence, if anyone will follow after me, let him deny himself, is the phrase used of Peter when he says, I do not know the man. I do not know the man. And then it says he invoked a curse and said, I do not know the man.
Yeah.
That denial is precisely the denial that you and I are called to have as Orthodox Christians about the former man, that is the old Adam in our lives. So that when we look on the craziness of our former delusion, when we look on the amount of time, I think I referenced this in my talk the other day, the amount of time, energy, money, creativity, and so forth that we spent on indulging ourselves, to put equal time, energy, creativity into following Christ. That strength of denial is the denial of the old man. I do not know that former me, because I'm a new creation in Christ now. That takes time to grow into, and it's a big step for a person in 2021.
Sure is.
But thank God, you and we're trying. As Father Sergius over here at the monastery says, if I say, what can I do for you today, Father? He goes, keep trying, today for Jesus, and let everyone know that the Lord doesn't ask us to go from, let's use an example that just comes quickly to my mind, from a prostitute for no money, Mary of Egypt, on day 1, to Saint Mary of Egypt walking on water on day 2. Yeah. There's a long time between those 2 Marys of Egypt, but the first step is the most important one, as they say. So let's remember that.
And to your point about, was it Father Sergius saying this to you? We really have to do this together.
Right.
Gain strength from one another.
Right.
All right. Thank you. The next question is about the OCF college students. Large university 5 minutes from our church has a OCA group on campus. Told by
OCF, I think you meant to say.
Oh, it must mean, OCF group on campus. Told by a priest who oversees it, told me that only a handful of students are active. What specifically can parishes offer juniors and seniors in high school before they leave for the college experience? And I think there's probably 2 questions in there. Why are there only a handful of students active? And maybe what can we do to encourage people to get active before they get into the college world?
Right. I'm going to look for 1 second because I don't have it in my mind directly. Hold on 1 second. Gary Cattell, Christian versus University. I want to make sure that I have the proper title. Yeah, okay. So there is a book that I want to encourage everyone to consider. It is dated in its contents, but it is timeless in its foundations. And that book is called The Christian versus the University. It was published, I think, in 2012. The author, his long name is Garrison McKean Cattell, Garrison, last name Cattell, Cattell. The Christian versus the University. Excuse me. Gary Cattell has a more well-known name, and that's the Willard Preacher. I see that you've at least heard of the Willard Preacher.
State College.
Gary Cattell in State College, Pennsylvania, an amazing apologist for Orthodox Christianity. I believe was a Baptist street preacher who preached hellfire and brimstone in front of a dorm or academic building. I forget whether Willard is a living place or an academic building. In any event, he preached out there on the steps 2, 3, 4 days a week, every day for years and years and years and years. And eventually was confronted by an Orthodox Christian, and he said it's the only argument he ever lost. He's an amazing apologist. And as a result of that encounter, he learned about Orthodox Christianity, became an Orthodox Christian, and then went right back to street preaching. And he's done this for like 30 years. It's his whole life.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Look up the Willard Preacher on YouTube and you'll see some of his interactions. Very thought provocative and very simply provocative, which on a college campus fits right in. Everything's a provocation on a college campus.
Yep.
So I say that because his book was that little book is a series of emails back and forth between, I think, an uncle or a godfather and his nephew or godson who went off to college, and it's correspondence. For the sake of narrative, it's correspondence about the various pressures that are faced on the college campus: drugs, alcohol, sex. It doesn't deal with transgender and all that stuff because it wasn't even a thing at that time.
Okay.
But anyway, that's a very helpful book to read to give a basic perspective on a number of these different topics related to discipleship and apologetics for college-age students. We used that book in our OCF fellowship at the Citadel one year in Charleston, South Carolina, as a study. We gave that as a gift to lots of college students, those going off to college and so forth. Again, there are a number of issues. It's amazing how rapidly it's changed, for the worse. But the principles underneath that are important. In terms of a few people on college campuses, it's often the case that the OCF is small. It is often the case, I have heard, I have not beheld it with my own eyes, so I say I have heard, it is not considered by folks of my acquaintance at least, often to be a serious place of Orthodox Christian discipleship. It's a lovely place of fellowship and a place to hang out and have some fun, but it is not necessarily considered a place where you're going to grow seriously in your faith. On the one hand, we should be grateful that college students are gathering together as Orthodox Christians to fellowship in college. 2 thumbs up, extra bonus points for that. On the other hand, it's such a critical time for bringing college students into young adulthood as serious Christians that we need to capture that time seriously. But in the case that it's a small group, take what you got and disciple away. And I would say to those who minister on the campuses, probably not to be concerned about being the campus minister, but let the students be that. Let the students be the evangelists for others. And while on the one hand having OCF sessions that are devoted to discipling the already Orthodox, do everything possible to have also thought provocative, soul provocative meetings that raise serious questions in order that people might come to listen to a different answer. I, for one, often tried to engage the other Christian groups on the campus to ask them to consider listening to a talk by an Orthodox Christian. Some accepted from time to time, or even the local Jewish group. Very interesting sometimes, an exchange for the sake of good in many ways, but to have a conversation with Orthodox Jewish students. What makes orthodoxy in Judaism versus Christianity? It's at least a chance for us to tell our story.
Yep.
First. So that's a thing to consider. With respect to juniors and seniors in high school, this is so critical of a question. And the fact that it's being asked is extremely beautiful, because it means someone's thinking about it. And though we might be coming late to that game, at least it's now in the front of our minds. I have to say that, as I was mentioning earlier, that college students come to college ministry is a miracle, and it's a beautiful gift. And it shows that these young people are serious about their faith in some form or fashion, because they're not being forced by mom or dad to go to these things. It's purely voluntary as a college student. But I've seen also with my own eyes some of the rather dismal catechesis, that the absence of catechesis in the lives of some of those young people. Thank the Lord they're clinging to a thread and coming to the OCF, and we can start there. But one time, for example, we were talking about the moral teachings of the church through a study of the Didache, the first century catechism from 90 AD. And I was just having the students read through it, and thankfully they were willing to ask questions. Like, for example, here was a question I asked. They were asking, well, what does this mean and what does that mean? They don't always know the terms. And I asked one student, let's call him Nomos, because it means name. I say, Nomos, how many days a week can an Orthodox Christian fornicate? And he said, every day but Sunday. and some of the people in the OCF were a little scandalized because they knew, and he's like, oh no, what was it? Well, maybe it's just a vocabulary thing. Although through that vocabulary, we can also teach, you know what, you shouldn't be sleeping with your girlfriend. That sort of thing. So juniors and seniors in high school, strangely enough, the apologetics that are behind the question actually probably need to go to third graders at this point. Unfortunately, third graders are not capable of thinking of the level in order to deal with the things that are coming at them. We won't go too far down the side trail, but Father Joshua, you and I, before we began this recording, you were mentioning that there's a drag queen library reading hour going on in Linthicum, Maryland. So how do you explain to children that this is wicked and very sinful and completely unhealthy for every human being, both the reader and the listener? Well, we have to be able to talk to our children at their level, at whatever age they are. But as students get ready to go off to college, we should not be teaching them about what a Phelonian is, how, what the prayers are that the priest prays when he puts his cuffs on, what the liturgical colors are. There should be serious study of the scriptures. The students should know at least the gospel story inside and out. They should be familiar with those things. And quite honestly, it would probably be helpful to have some sessions to talk about the serious things that they will face. The challenge is they won't be facing them for the first time in college. In my day, maybe, some of these things were in schools, but not so much. But to go to college now, you're only being confronted in the most loose and wild way, the things that you've already been exposed to in high school. So at least to start walking through those things and talking about, what does it mean to be created in God's image and likeness? What does it mean male and female? He created them. that we do not accept at all as Christians, as that human beings are anything other than male or female, except for biological anomaly, so rare in the world, and often correctable by surgery at birth. But none of this, I think I'm a woman, therefore castrate me. So to be able to talk through some of those things at the most basic level, including, I would say, not only the theology behind those things for a good defense for before the dread judgment seat of Christ and before all of our classmates, but also how to deal with the conflict of those things when we're confronted with it, how to be patient with an angry person, how to endure ridicule, how to be how to I don't know how to be peaceful in the face of the administration if they say, if you keep talking like that, you're going to be kicked out of college. I mean, those two things, the apologetics of and the theology of it on the one hand, but the spiritual life and how not to react. Our retired Metropolitan Jonah had an essay, "Do not react." What was the other one? There are three commands. Do not react. I can't remember the second one, and keep inner stillness. If you look up "don't react" and keep inner stillness, you'll find the third one. It's critical. But those three steps really important to teach our young people also, because I mean I've encountered here in the seminary monastery community a teenager in one of the families who's completely ostracized on the school bus at in 8th grade. Yeah. Because she thinks that two girls kissing is not a good thing. Yeah. And God bless her, she's a strong young girl, but she is the only one who doesn't drink the water, so to speak. Anyhow, those are a few answers. It's a very complex and difficult topic, but I think those two trajectories, the apologetic perspective on human sexuality and the nature of male and female on the one hand, and on the other hand, how to be as mature and peaceful of a Christian in the face of that kind of criticism and onslaught is challenging as well.
Yeah, maybe you could speak a little bit further. What I've noticed is that sometimes people can kind of confuse the gospel and the real core of Orthodoxy with some of these issues, like really what it means to be an Orthodox Christian is to stand up against drag queen story hour. That's a little bit out of balance, but at the same time, on the other end, there can be a tendency to say, well, we don't need to engage any of these questions. We can just kind of preach the basic truths of orthodoxy, purification and theosis and so on, and we can just kind of leave the rest of that aside. In the crucible of the university, that's really not possible.
Right. Well, I mean, again, I've been out of college for too many years now. Strange enough to say, I graduated in 1993, so someone will have to do the math. I mean, could it be that I'm almost 30 years out of college? Yes. My college, the College of William and Mary in Virginia, was the first public university to change its sexual orientation policy for admission, allowing no discrimination, changed its non-discrimination policy to include sexual orientation. And that was a big, huge thing. That was in my year. That was a year that this particular topic became a strong one on the college campus very formally. A few years later, at the College of William and Mary, a student organization, it could have been the student government, hosted, I think on a couple of consecutive years, a sex workers convention in the university basketball arena. And a few years after that, William and Mary had the first transgender homecoming queen. So these things I've seen progress in my own alma mater. Yeah. Do we need to get wrapped around the axle on those issues as issues say at my alma mater, I mean, I took dramatic issue when the college denied the Christianity of its chapel established in 1693 and took the cross out of an east-facing Anglican altar and put it in a closet and said that the chapel was not inclusive. And so I think that was important to deal with. But the other issues, I think I have learned, I have tried to learn. It's not an easy lesson. I have tried to learn from my teacher, Father Thomas Hopko, who in one of his lectures, if you listen to enough of them, you'll finally hear that story. He's talking about how he gave this talk, as you probably know, Father Joshua, called The Cross of Christ. It was like his talk. It was in 3 parts. He gave it over and over and over and over and over again, and often just called it a different thing. And it's a beautiful, timeless teaching in 3 parts. You can get it on Ancient Faith Radio. In any event, in one of the places where he gave that talk, there was a homosexual man who was just aggressive towards him in the question and answer period. And Father Tom just gently, steered him. How did he steer him? He said, you know what? I don't want to answer the question about what the Orthodox Church teaches about homosexuality. I don't want to talk about that right now. Well, why not? Well, let's not worry about that right now. And eventually the fellow said, why do you keep saying that? Father Tom said, just tell me what you believe about Jesus. Let's start with Jesus. His view was, if we would start with Jesus and work through the divinity of the Lord, eventually we're going to get to how we need to live our lives. I remember in the parish a number of years ago, we have in Charleston an amazingly beautiful church. It is truly a piece of heaven. And everyone who came into that church said, wow, 2 times when they walked in. They would look up at the dome and they'd say, wow. And they'd look at the apse and say, wow. And then they would ask some question, usually like, wow, what is this? What is this from Byzantium, or what is this? And one person said, interesting, instead of wow. He was an iconoclast. But another person who didn't say wow twice came in and she looked around at all the beautiful iconography, which was basically inspired, I think, by a 12th century church in Cyprus. And I mean, everything done in the most beautiful heavenly way. And she said, I have a question for you. What's the Orthodox Church teach about gay marriage? And I thought, man, I'm toast right here. Because if I avoid the answer, she's going to think I'm avoiding it. And if I give her the answer, she's not going to think about what's underneath all that. She's just going to think that's our issue. It's not our issue. Our issue is take up thy cross, deny thyself, take up thy cross and follow me, in the context of being truly a human being. And so I think all of that is a piece of what we're talking about. When those matters come into the church, we need to fight them to the death. But when they're happening at the library down the street, we have to take a slightly different track, I think, because the library is not the church. And we can and should be opposed to those things being promoted to either our children specifically or the children generically being citizens. On the other hand, in a circumstance like that, let's say at the library, basically people are just going to think we're religious zealots, and you've got the really super spiritual people who are there with their newly enlightened selves, and you've got the zealots outside opposed to us, and we're not going to gain anybody that way. But how we will gain them, I'm not sure. Tragically, I believe, as I mentioned in my talk, very few people are convinced by rational arguments. It's not like we're going to say, let me tell you the 10 reasons why it is spiritually and emotionally dangerous to let a man dressed as a sexy woman read a story to your children at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or dressed as a prostitute or something like that. Let me tell you some reasons why that's not a good idea. Very few of them are going to go, oh, I never thought of that. They'd already thought of it if they were going to be convinced by that. I'm afraid to say that most of the time, the chance that we're going to get is when that 3-year-old, 5-year-old, 7-year-old finally goes off to college and starts to put 2 and 2 together and realize what a train wreck that life really is. That's the chance that we have.
Yeah.
with a lot of prayer between now and then. Sorry for the long answer. I hope that's helpful.
Very well said. Thank you. We also got a question from Deacon Michael Bishop, and who often goes by Father Deacon Michael Bishop, so that's
Yes.
confusing. He's at a church here in Baltimore.
Yes.
He lived in a really rough part of Baltimore. He's
Yes.
a Black deacon in Moscow Patriarchate Parish here in Baltimore. So he made a comment about how, especially the perception in the Black community is that that Russian church is basically equal to like white person church.
Yes.
You could comment a little bit on his comment.
Sure. Sure. Deacon Michael is an amazing and wonderful character. I met him many years ago, actually at your parish. And then later, Father Robert Mickleon's parish in Annapolis, Holy Archangels.
He also goes by photo deacon.
I was just going to say that he's often called the photo deacon because he loves photography and takes lots and lots and lots of pictures.
Yeah.
I really appreciate him very much, and I have learned a lot from him. It is important for us to be able to listen to one another, especially in our day, and to try to learn from those who have backgrounds different from ours, cultures different from ours, upbringings different from ours. And he and I, you and I, and he, in those categories, we've had very different experiences. He told me one time when someone said, "Oh, is that a white church? Is your church a white church?" He had the funniest answer, which I absolutely love. Do you know what the answer was?
No.
He said, "No, my church isn't a white church, it's a red brick church." And that is so, to me, that's so disarming.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it so much. I myself was asked the same exact question in Charleston, South Carolina, after the tragic shootings, Dylan Roof shooting and killing 9 Black people in the Mother Emanuel Church, the anniversary of which is tomorrow. May the Lord remember Cynthia, Clementa, Daniel, DePayne, Ethel, Myra, Susie, Sharonda, and Taiwanza, the 9 beautiful people whom he killed in that church, and also help and turn the heart of dear Dylan Roof while he is still breathing. I had a reporter come to my church at that time, and I think actually she's the one who wrote the essay in GQ about the shootings. And she stood in the narthex after Vespers, and she said, she said something like, "So what's it like being in a white church? You know, or so this is a white church?" And I was like, I wish I had Deacon Michael Bishop's answer at that time, like, white church, this is a yellow plaster church. I mean, you know, I don't think she would have received that well at the time under those circumstances. But I said, you know, I can't recall her name at the moment. Let's call her Susie. You know, I said, "Susie, the tragedy of that kind of separation, segregation, all of that bad history in our land has no part of the Orthodox faith." I told her, in fact, Deacon Michael and I did not talk about this, but I did say this to her: "You know what? Our church long predates American Christianity, has absolutely nothing to do with denominationalism. I didn't tell her this part. While there are definitely Orthodox churches that exist on one side of the street because they don't go to the Orthodox church on the other side of the street, like the Baptists and everybody else has. We have that too because we're human beings. But we have no church in anywhere, I would say, in the whole world, where this Orthodox church was made for the white people to go to, and that Orthodox church was made for the Black people. We don't have that anywhere in our history." And I told her, for the record, in Charleston, South Carolina, in the 1950s, the Ku Klux Klan was burning crosses on the front yard of the Greek Orthodox Church. So if the KKK will burn a cross in the yard of the Orthodox Church in town, you can be sure that we are not a white church. I mean, if you want to be in that kind of category. So with respect to these comments, Deacon Michael more specifically, one thing that he said in his comments here, I know, it says, a Black priest whom I know went to his church, and a man told him the Baptist church is up the street. So a Black person visited an Orthodox church, and the greeter, what kind of greeting is this, said, oh, you must be looking for the Baptist churches up the street. That's disgusting.
Yeah.
And we have to acknowledge that's disgusting. It's terrible. It's horrible. It takes no account that this person is a fish who has jumped into your boat.
Yeah.
God sent him to you. As my friend Father David Rucker often has said, he served for many years as an OCMC missionary. He was the associate director of the OCMC. He said, the visitors that God sends to our church are for our salvation. Like we often think about it like we're going to the church for our salvation. It's true, but the visitors that are sent to our churches are for your salvation and mine. So everyone walking through that door, you better accept that person as Jesus in your midst and welcome that stranger because you were once a stranger. So anyway, so we need to acknowledge that kind of greeting is absolutely disgusting and has absolutely no place in an Orthodox Christian church ever. And if that person is in leadership in the parish, he or she should be summarily removed. And if that person insisted on standing in the back to be the judge and jury of everyone who walks through the door, we should make sure that that person is not at that door, and in whatever it would take. So that'd be the first step. It takes no account for what I was mentioning earlier, that Orthodox Christianity is for everyone. So those few points, just from the perspective of the insiders in that church, which is us, we need to readjust our vision to say, you know what? First of all, the Lord said, go and tell. He said, go and make disciples. He didn't say wait and watch or wait and welcome. It's good that we wait and welcome, but if people are just coming in and we're not even welcoming, that's disgusting. So I apologize that ever happened to one person, but I can say it's happened to at least two people because I know a story just like that. Although it was not a Black person who was rushed up the street to the Baptist church, it was a man who came to our parish, and we tried to help him recover from drug addiction, which, thank the Lord, he found sobriety. He moved to New York from Charleston in order to start a new life, and finally got up the gumption to go to an Orthodox church. He went there an hour early and was sitting on the steps. He's a little disheveled, getting his life together. But imagine a guy who showed up an hour early to an Orthodox church. He got there before the church warden, who had the keys even. And when the church warden got there, said, what are you doing here? That was his first greeting. What are you doing here? You some kind of homeless person? Well, what if it was a homeless person? How about, good morning. Welcome to Jesus's house. We're so not, how can we help you? You know what I mean? Anyway, I don't want to go on into too many examples, but we have to, as I was trying to mention in my talk, we have to realize every one of us has to dig very deep to see that we were once strangers, foreigners, and through our baptism, we are brought close to Christ, and not only no longer foreigners, but sons, and not only sons, but friends. And if that's the case of you and me before Jesus, how could we give anybody else anything other than a welcome? That doesn't mean that we have to accept a drunk person in the church, or someone who's high on drugs into the church, or someone who is flagrantly going against the teachings of the church in order to make a scene in the church. No, but a person who's coming in sincerity to try to see what heaven looks like, come on in, join us.
That's right.
You know?
That's right.
Yeah,
requires a renewing of the mind.
Yeah.
In many of our parish cultures, it's just foreign, unfortunately. But
yeah. I hope I didn't carry on too long in that answer, but that's how I would start.
Good. Well, our last question was about some of these issues that you actually have touched on, about um, the heaven and the church. Father John, when you talked about being heavenly in the church, do you mean active participation during the worship, please?
Okay, so when I talked about being heavenly in the church, I mean active participation during worship. This question has a simple answer that can be worked out in 1,000 ways. The worship of the Lord God Almighty, the creator of heaven and earth, the Savior of the world, whose Holy Spirit we expect to descend upon us once again this Sunday at Holy Pentecost. The worship of that one true God ought to be the first and best and most beautiful and most heavenly gift that we possibly can offer as a thank you to God. The Divine Liturgy, the first half of the Divine Liturgy is sometimes called the Liturgy of the Catechumens. The second half of the liturgy, sometimes called something like the Liturgy of the Offering. In simple English terms, it's often called the Great Thanksgiving. The anaphora, the Greek word anaphora, given for the second part of the service, it just means lift up, like when we say, let us lift up our hearts. But that whole service is a service that can be summarized in 2 English words: thank you, or better in 3 words: thank you, Lord. That's what the morning is. And because if we think on the that beautiful image in Chora, Chora, that beautiful church in Istanbul, which means like out in the country, that's what Chora means. There's a famous image of the resurrection, the harrowing of Hades, Jesus lifting up Adam and Eve out of the tombs. That's the most famous image of that. In that image are always Adam and Eve. Well, usually Adam and Eve. There's at least Adam and often Adam and Eve, but that one has Adam and Eve. And then there are a few figures off to the sides of them. Often you'll see St. John the Baptist, who's recognizable with his scruffiness. I'm a little unshaven myself today, a little scruffy. And then was a mystery to me figure who's a young man with a shepherd's crook. Do you know that? What's that?
I've often seen it with King David. Is that a representation of him?
No, King David is often always there as well.
Yeah.
But go back and look at one. You'll see a young man, no crown, very young, with a shepherd's crook. And that is Abel, the righteous Abel. He's always one step next to Adam and Eve, being the offspring of Adam and Eve, being the righteous offspring. And what he was known for, besides being killed by his brother, was the reason why he was killed by his brother. His brother, Cain, offered a little something from what he had, and Abel offered his first and best. So our Sunday worship should be like what Cain offered, which is our first and best. That doesn't mean that our choir has to be like an opera, but it should be competent and practiced, and it should sound as beautiful as it can, given who is there. The church should be clean. It should be, in the worst case scenario, it should be simple, beautiful, and matching. It should not be, oh, we need 20 chairs in the church. Okay, well, everybody bring a chair that you have at home, and you got 20 chairs that people didn't want at their houses, and now there are 20 chairs in the church. Yeah. It should be simple, beautiful, and matching, and it should resemble heaven, whether it's in an old folks' home, a storefront, or a Byzantine intentionally built building, or one step next to that is your beautiful church in Linthicum, which was intentionally built. Was it a Methodist church, maybe? Presbyterian?
It was Methodist.
Very beautiful stone Gothic building, beautifully converted inside, with appropriate iconography that makes you, that welcomes you into heaven. So those things should all be the case. The best icons that the church can have, matching, appropriately sized, orderly. The church should be clean. The singers should know what they're doing. The priest should be ready. and he should be preaching a message which is both intelligible and edifying and after the gospel and not at some other time. And the people should do how the Spirit moves them according to the good order of the church. Does that mean there should be congregational singing? Well, in some places that's accomplished very, very beautifully, and it elevates everything to heaven. In other places it's done very poorly and it makes a mess. In some places, having a few choir members is terrible, and in some places having a few is heaven. We want to find out what's heaven to offer our first and best, and the people taking part, listening to the prayers, responding amen when it's your turn, crying out Lord have mercy when it is, and welcoming people into that beautiful, great Thanksgiving. That's what I mean by active participation. I will say that a good understanding of liturgical theology, liturgy as life, really goes a long way to establish in a parish a liturgy that's alive. And when I say alive, I don't mean like titillating or sensorily awesome, although it might be those things also in some kind of way, but the fact that everyone in the parish understands why they're there and what we're doing comes out in the attitudes, even if no one ever says a word, except for the choir and the priest. So those kinds of things. But I will say that one of the most heavenly experiences that I ever had was when I had a chance to visit the Church of the Annunciation in Nazareth in Israel. It's a very small church. There is an unfortunately Vatican II era Roman Catholic cathedral that's notable on the skyline. If you go just next to that in a little courtyard, there's a tiny little Orthodox church with very beautiful iconography. We had a chance to serve there with the Archbishop of Nazareth on a pilgrimage one time. And the entire service was sung by everyone present in Arabic. I mean, we didn't sing it because we didn't know. We just did what we could do in English when we were asked. That place, we were in heaven on that day. And it just worked that way. There was no orchestration of it, but it was very clear that the packed church was the desire of the hearts of those people, and they loved the Lord enough to make that offering beautiful. That can equally happen in a place with very few singers, in a church with like in a storefront. I mentioned in my talk the other day, in the beginning of the book called The Inner Kingdom, one of the collections of Metropolitan Callistos Ware's essays, his story of his conversion is in there. And it says he was walking down a street in London and he saw this little sign hanging outside a storefront type place. And it just said, Orthodox Church or something like that. He wondered, well, what's that? And he went inside and it was just heaven. And when he came out, he said, I forget exactly how he put it, but this is essentially it. I didn't know whether I was in there for 20 minutes or 2 hours. It didn't matter. He, like the emissaries of St. Vladimir, didn't know whether he was in heaven or on earth. And that's the kind of thing that every one of our parishes is capable of accomplishing if the priest and the people working together will say, we are going to offer this as our first and best, and let everything else fall into its place after that. So there you go. I think.
No, and I really appreciate your love for both the liturgy and the Lord, for your service to him that shows through. So thank you so much for.
My pleasure. I like to make an unexpected comment right now related to your parish, Father Joshua. When my wife and I were in the Episcopal Seminary still, we had the opportunity to pass through Baltimore. We were heavily read in the Orthodox faith at that time, but had not yet. I don't think we had attended a divine liturgy anywhere yet at all. We were actually quite nervous to do so, because the way I put it to Father Peter Gilquist in those days, with whom I was having some correspondence, he said, you got to go to a divine liturgy. And I said, I'm not going to do it, Father Peter. And he said, well, you're reading all these things, you got to go sometime. I said, I know that when I go in there, I'll never come out. And I sincerely meant it at the time, and here I am, So now we went to the liturgy at Holy Cross in Linthicum, and if you'd like to see a slice of heaven, you all should visit Holy Cross Orthodox Church in Linthicum on Camp Mead Road, right?
Camp Mead Road.
Yep, it's on the corner of Camp Mead, and I forget what number that is.
Maple Road.
And you will step into heaven. The beautiful iconography done by Seraphim O'Keefe, which is just stunning and awesome. And the decorations, which all he did so beautifully, tie in the color scheme and the decoration to tie into the windows that were the stained glass windows that were made many years ago on the west wall. Totally beautiful. In any event, we were in that liturgy before all that iconography, actually. And we were terribly disheartened that we weren't going to be able to take communion. We knew why, and we weren't expecting it. But it was a great heaviness in our heart. Like, we long for this, and we know we can't do it, being Episcopalians. And someone brought us a piece of antidron, the holy bread after communion. They just walked up to us and said, "This is bread of friendship, and we're very glad you're here." I had sincerely, I remember it. It could make me cry right now. I had one of the most sincere experiences of communion in that moment that I'd ever had in my whole life. And I was a very pious Episcopalian, regular churchgoer my whole life, except for college, but never missed a Sunday in my whole life, except for that brief period, which was a terrible time in my life. And that adoring, kind moment was a significant turning point in my life personally and in our family's life, which in part contributed to our becoming Orthodox Christians, and here we are. So I thank you and your parish and your predecessor and all those who were with them. I'm sure you carry that torch with great zeal and very well. But that's the kind of place that changes hearts, and I know that because it changed mine. So I thank you for that.
You couldn't have said it better, and really, I've just inherited it, so I can speak well of it as well, because the community and the love for one another and the love for, especially for visitors, really shines through and is remarkable.
Yeah.
Thank God, and I also thank God for Seraphim O'Keefe, because I get to look at this icon of Christ that's right in the apse, in the middle of the apse, which is just amazing. I don't know what can I say. I just
for you to say "I just," and that's all, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, it's that there's so very. I'm so blessed to be able to stand there.
Yes.
And worship our Lord.
Amen.
Thank you, Father. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you. As I noted in the end of the keynote or lecture, whatever we'll call it, if anyone wished to reach me, you're welcome to write me at Dean, D-E-A-N, at stots.edu, S-T-O-T-S, Dean at stots.edu. Happy to take other questions, happy to engage. This particular set of questions very important, and maybe raises other questions. Happy to talk about those things. Is what we try to do. So if I can help in any way, let me know.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on today, and hope everything else goes well. Enjoy your day.
Oh, thank you. You too.
Bye, Father.